So I don't know about you, but this gospel that we read rings really true for me. This picture of Jesus like walking down this road and the disciples behind him arguing along the way. I half expect Jesus to just stop and yell, "Would y'all stop? I'm going to turn this caravan right around and I'm turning into my parents. I do this. It's happening for me. My kids in the back seat, oh my God, stop touching each other. I have to put Sage, the youngest one, in the middle, in the rear-facing seat, in between the other two, just to keep the peace, right? They're arguing about whose turn it is, who's first, who got it last. It's all variations of who's the greatest, right? They know they shouldn't do that, but they can't help it. I think there's something there for us to think about. This Jeremiah passage is the prophet Jeremiah who is shining light onto the people's, their unfaithfulness of the covenant throughout time. And Jeremiah is very aware now of some dark plots that are coming against his very own life. Dark stuff for him to realize. The epistle from James is reading, he's shining light again in that same area, saying, we want something that we don't have, and we would go as far as to commit murder to get it, right? There's these cravings of war within us. We covet something we cannot obtain, and so what do? We engage in disputes or conflicts until finally we get our cut of it all, these cravings of war. Now, these are all examples of what it looks like when we get consumed with greatness. This is what it looks like when humans choose to exercise dominance over another, when dominance becomes the goal or the good. Now, I'm just less inclined to think that there's a devil out there with a pitchfork poking at me to do that, because I'm pretty gosh darn good at doing it myself. I think there's something within us that causes us to do that. And Jesus takes that idea of greatness and he's turning it on its head. Not just to say that radical thing that whoever wants to be first must be last, which I could remind my Texas Longhorn brothers and sisters about that quote, but I won't. Don't think I see all this random burnt orange out there. I know who you are. I'm taking notes. Jesus not only is radical in his word about the last shall be first and the first shall be last, but he's also radical when he pulls the child into this. Points to a child who in the ancient world was nothing, had no power, had no strength. Children weren't valued like they were today. They were a drain on your resources until finally they were old enough to help out the family, right? That's just the way it is. Today, Phil has a grandbaby and we all go crazy, right? It's a shift. It's been a change in the way we understand that. That was not so when Jesus pulls a kid in. Calvary, and Peyton talked about this, we have a tremendous pride in our leaders, in our children, in our youth, and what they become, in the ways that that we include them right now as part of the church. They're not just the future, they're now. We are all now in this together. And the mission trips and the way they are counselors for day camp and the kids that we bring to day camp and the kids that we teach in Sunday school, all of that. We have third grade Bibles that's happening today and these milestone ministries. All of these are ways that we seek to teach our children what Jesus sought to teach the disciples. To prod us all with that question, to say, what would it look like if we imagined greatness wasn't about power and wealth and fame? What would that look like? But instead, greatness was measured by what we shared with others, how we served others, how we loved another. How would that then impact the world? That's what we want to teach. And we start that conversation about stewardship now, leading up to All Saints Sunday on November 4th. And each week we sing a hymn or a verse of the hymn, All Are Welcome. We add to that because I think it's important, and I love the metaphors in that hymn, and you probably already know it. But it's important, I think, to pause and think about what kind of house are we building here? Right? How do we build? How do we fund? How do we support a house where all are welcomed? We don't do it by measuring our own success, by measuring our own greatness. We don't do it by what we get out of it. We do it by what we put into it. That's how we build something for everyone where all are welcomed. We measure our greatness, not by the power that we wield, but the power, ourselves and our resources that we give away to those who are weak and need to know that God loves them. That's what we talk to our children and our youth about on all of their adventures. Last week, Eva Wood came to me right 2 minutes before this service started and said, "I need to talk to you, Pastor Kyle." And I was like, "Okay." And she said, I've decided I want to be baptized. And so we talked for a little bit about that. And then later, Michael Ann came to me and said, "Oh, Kyle, I'm sorry that we cornered you. It was a bad time. We came at a bad time." And I just stopped and I thought, the day that I am too busy to talk to a fourth grader who's decided they want to be baptized is the day I need to hang my stole up. Right? This is why we do what we do. To share the faith, to teach the faith, to grow the faith that is within us. Let us build a house where love can dwell and all can safely live, a place where saints and children tell how hearts learn to forgive. That's what we do here. Now, this passage reminds us that work is difficult. Jesus says, "I'm going to die, I'm going to rise again," and the disciples are like, "I'm sorry, what?" They don't understand. And that tells me this is not something that I'm going to get right at the beginning as well. Jesus calls us to that discipleship that is a difficult road, and that's okay. In fact, my Wednesday at Wendy's Bible study, we just finished reading up the Gospel of Mark. And in that gospel, what I've learned is that Mark, the author, wants followers, people who are about the same things that Jesus is about. So that's what he's trying to write for. And the irony of it is that as the gospel goes on, you find less and less followers around Jesus. Because at one point in the middle, he's surrounded by 5,000 plus that he's fed, and they're following him. And then he starts to talk about what discipleship is, and some of those people start to peel off. Then you go on a couple more chapters, and then Jesus is just with the 12 disciples, teaching them a little bit more. And then he ends up saying, "Okay, I've got to go to the garden because some bad stuff is going to happen." And only with him is Peter, James, and John. And then we know the next steps. Jesus is being questioned by Pilate, and only Peter is standing outside by the fire. And then finally, when he's crucified on the cross, it says in the Gospel of Mark, only a few women were watching from a distance. This road of discipleship is hard. It's difficult. It also reminds me that I'm broken. But it also reminds me that we are called still. In the midst of our brokenness, God calls us to that walk. And there's grace in that, friends. Because here's the thing. This road that the disciples and Jesus are traveling, when they argue, when they misunderstand, that road that they are walking, it eventually becomes the very road to Jerusalem and to the cross. That road to the cross, the road that Jesus walks out of love for you and for me. And Jesus doesn't bail off that road. He doesn't turn the caravan around when they don't get it. He walks with the disciples. And Jesus will walk with us. So we share what we have on this walk of faith. And there's good news in that. Thanks be to God. Amen.